Mark, thanks for coming on with me, man.
Hey, man, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
And I know we're doing this as kind of a dual thing over both websites. But all of this started, Mark, back on in my forums. I know I want to give credit where credit's due. Tracy, Joe, Pam, Chris, Mark, all these people got together and found this Miller document. And in the Miller document, it was supposedly written by a guy back in the 60s. He talks a lot about the 60s, talks a lot about today, talks about, we can go into the Miller document, but basically it was written by this guy who was a Harvard graduate, Yale graduate, got involved in the military, and his granddaughter sent this letter out to Linda Newton Perry and says, hey, this was in my grandfather's belongings. I think he's talking about Bigfoot here. And it just kind of sat on this website. I think from 2010 on, it's been sitting on her website. And no one's really paid it any attention, but and we can go through it. But what was your original take on the Miller doc?
Well, I mean, I looked at it yesterday, and I was pretty surprised that a lot of what I read, first of all, sounded like it was actually coming from somebody who knew what they were talking about, first of all. And not only that, but there were a lot of different corollaries between what I read in the document and what we're seeing in the field, yeah, which really it was something that, kind of drove it home that this really could be something legitimate. I mean, every once in a while something like this pops up, and I think we're all forced to, take the obvious route, which is, you don't know the validity of something like this. It does strike me that it was written by somebody who knew quite a bit about what really is out there. So I don't know, man. At first glance, I'm of the mind that this could be something. If it is, it's significant. I think, it definitely warrants further investigation, I think. What about you, Wes?
Yeah, I think so. And then there was the additional, not only the Miller doc, but they have the Wentworth doc. And basically it sounds like, and we can kind of go through the Miller doc first, but the Wentworth doc sounds like a biologist kind of arguing, not getting along with Dr. Miller, not really buying into what he wants to call these things or how he wants to classify these things. And so there's all this other documentation that kind of links to the Miller doc. I mean, there's a lot of different, there's too many terms in the Miller doc. There's too many details in the Miller doc. There's too many. If it was a hoax, I don't understand why they would send it to one person, have it sit on a website, and no one really addressed it ever again. Usually guys that do hoax, are wanting to go, I gotcha. And you don't get that sense from reading this document one bit.
No, I didn't get that sense either. I always look at, stuff like that, or like this information that's, been sitting there, like you said, for a couple of years, as, I try to be real cautious about, what I say about it, because you really can't validate something like this, no matter how much. I mean, the man would need to actually still be alive to verify this. In the end, I think that's what would have to have happened. But I do look at this, and like I said, I see some of what this guy's talking about in my field research, and so, I'm willing to take, what's in this document and what this biologist is saying, and continue to try to validate it in my field research. When we talk about, how would you begin to validate something like this?
You can't. Yes. I mean, you really can't. We don't have the original document. Like you said, the man that wrote it's dead. And so the author's dead, and you don't really have the original document. You can only validate it so much, you know what I mean? Even if he was still alive and I brought him on air and he presented all of this to the audience, at the end of the day, it's kind of like an encounter. How can you prove that? You know what I mean? And so I think with this guy, I think probably what happened, I know Tracy had mentioned this, but I think probably what happened with this guy is he was writing out all this information knowing that one day, because of what he was told, we should probably go through the doc. That'll probably help.
Hey, let's
That'll
do it.
help,
Let's do it. I have a copy here, so.
Let me, I got to kind of turn to read it, and I'll put it up for the audience. But at the very beginning of the document, it's his granddaughter that sent it off, and she says, "Hey, my English isn't that great." I think he was 92 when he passed away. We found this letter and his belongings, and kind of different terms that she uses. I think she's French, isn't she? Sophia?
I think that's possible, yeah. I mean, it's a French name. It could also be Italian. I don't know for sure. I look at the situation like, with this second and third kind of, party information coming out here. But it is interesting. I think there are some telling aspects to the way she actually articulates herself that maybe English isn't her first language.
Yeah, because she uses a term, I think it's more, which actually is like French for grandmother or something. But she uses like little terms in how she presents it to make you think, well, and as we go through the document, you'll see there's portions of it that are cut out. And I think probably what Dr. Miller was doing was he was explaining in more specific terms, hey, here's the dumbed down version, here's some more scientific information. And I think when his granddaughter was reading that portion, she had no clue what he was talking about. It sounded like mumbling to her. But I kind of think there's portions of that document that are very scientific that were cut out. And I'm assuming this portion of it.
That would make sense. I think, where she's saying illegible, I think it could just be where he was writing some scientific terms and she didn't quite understand it. Because when you start looking into the Latin terminology and you don't, English is a second language, obviously there'd be a little confusion there. You know what I mean? Here he is writing in English, and then suddenly there's some Latin terminology, some scientific terminology. That would definitely be confusing to someone. So she maybe describes it. That's definitely a possibility, Wes. She probably describes it as, where it was confusing. Yeah. And cutting it out, though, I think that's a disappointment. I think to me it is, because that could very well be some of the most valuable information that was contained in the document.
Right. Yeah. And this portion's kind of important. He goes on to talk about his education. He said, I was employed by the federal government. My undergraduate was focused in forestry and land management. And I'll get to his degree here in a moment. But basically, he goes through and explains his background. How he went to Yale. He went to Harvard. He gives you the dates. And what's interesting is the research team actually looked this guy up, and he did go to Harvard. All of that's correct. None of that's fake. All of that's real. This was a real man that lived at one time. He did go to Harvard. He did go to Yale. He did work for the federal government. But what's interesting is when he goes to work for the federal government, you kind of like lose the trail on what happened to this guy. You kind of, you know what I mean? You don't have a whole lot of information basically from that point on about this guy, which I think is interesting. Yeah,
that would be that's like atypical for someone that goes to work for the federal government in a capacity that is unofficial. Yeah. I think that's not uncommon in circles where people come out after retirement and in other subject matter. It's a very typical part of an investigation to find that somehow they just fall off the grid. Where, if they're in the military and they're suddenly stationed or transferred to a different part of the military, and in their journals or in their memoirs, these guys, 40 years after the fact come out and say, well, I was transferred at that point to this base, and suddenly, the investigator finds that, the records are missing or they just vanish from the military. Yeah. And here's a man coming forward writing, a memoir about how he's involved with, some kind of technological stuff that's not of this earth, all this crazy stuff. And, so, this is not something that, it almost, if you think about it in a weird way, it kind of confirms that he was involved in something that was a little, shady for the government.
Yeah, I tend to agree, especially since we can't find him. But he graduated Harvard Medical School in the early 1940s, and he completed his residence. Basically, he was an orthopedic forensic surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston.
Now, when you talk about his schooling, when we're talking about, let's just look at the Yale thing. He's got a master of science and forestry. The two, if you look at the schooling itself, a master's of science and forestry, and then at Harvard, he's it's orthopedics.
Kind of weird.
Orthopedic forensic surgery. Now you have a combination, and it almost makes me think that this guy was being groomed to do this, because those two
don't match.
You're not going to study orthopedics. They would call it something different if you were studying wildlife anatomy. Right. Orthopedics is typically something to do with human anatomy. You know what I mean? So it strikes me as interesting that those two are what he got his degrees in. That's just I'm taking a stab in the dark there, but it is interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's a weird. I read that too. It's a weird as far as his path he's trying to figure out.
What are the chances that a guy is studying something that has nothing to do with something else on the outside, and yet it perfectly prepares him to do what he says he's going to do in the journal. You know what I'm saying? That's a little. It definitely is something that I don't know that you could ever verify, but it is pretty coincidental. You got to admit.
Early experiments determined that DNA is a component of chromosomes. Anyway, it goes on talking about the DNA. It was at this time that several of our team members were called to Bandera County, Texas, where the forestry scientists and biologists assigned to Edwards Plateau reported the dead bodies of strange type of humans. The first report I received were speculating that these were feral humans from the local Comanche Indian tribes. The bodies were supposedly found in and around one of the massive caves within Edwards Plateau. So he's working for the government, like you were just saying. It's just odd that he almost. I tend to agree with you, Mark. It's almost like this guy was being groomed for this. It has to be,
Well, it really, when you consider the contrast in the two studies, in the two disciplines,
right?
And then not only that, but the first part of his work where he's talking about working for the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, but then there's a slash in it, obviously, is Forestry Service.
Right.
Well, we're looking at a guy who went to two different Ivy League schools and got degrees that are prepping him in advance for a career with the FS, with the Forestry Service, to investigate accidental deaths. Right? Okay. We have a broad terminology there, accidental deaths, right?
Right.
Okay, so Forestry Service employees, I'm assuming that there probably would be a broad spectrum of accidental deaths. However, it is a little telling that this gentleman is being prepped. What appears to be that he's being prepped to conduct possible autopsies.
Right.
The bottom line is it's interesting. You know what I mean?
I wish that he would have given some dates, more dates in the letter, because some parts of it you can tell it's a man from the 60s writing it, and then some parts of it you can tell it's a guy from the 90s writing it. So as you're reading through it, it kind of reads differently, almost like this was more than just a quick letter he wrote up. These were probably notes over the, assuming the document's real, we can just assume that. He's probably putting in notes over the years into this as just a memoir. And, you know, Tracy actually brought up a good point, and Joe brought this point up too when we were talking to him about this. As you read through this document, he is basically being told that they're going to move these creatures onto a preserve, into not public land, but into a preserve. And they had a 20-year plan. And as you read through the document, what's interesting is he's becoming an old man now. And I think he's starting to realize, I don't know when the 20-year plan took place, but he's starting to think now this work is basically going to, he wants to be remembered. I think Tracy is right. I think he wanted to be remembered for the work that he did on this. And that was the point of writing these documents. But what's interesting is he goes, when I arrived in Texas, I was surprised to find 3 bodies, 1 adult female and 2 female juveniles. I examined them as I typically would any human subject. But to my dismay, one of these creatures still seemed to be alive. I had become upset with local scientists, but they reassured me that they confirmed that all 3 were deceased. After further investigation, I found that these creatures were not human. They, in fact, had remarkable rapid reparative processes, and we can talk about that, but he says, hence the reason why one of the creatures seemed dead, but in fact was regenerated to a degree. Unfortunately, the restorative abilities of these creatures were not enough to keep it alive. They were massive in size and distinctly a new primate species unknown to science at that time. I don't think that rapid repair process that he's talking about is anything out of normal. It's not magical, is what I'm trying to say. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that when people describe within the Bigfoot subject magical abilities or anything like that, I think that that's a very human, modern perspective on something that is just natural, and that's humans not understanding what's going on. There are things on planet Earth that have extremely powerful immune systems and are resistant on a micro level within the animal itself. Alligators, for instance, are immune to staph, and there are scientists right now in the state of Florida who are working on building some type of an inoculation or a treatment for people who get MRSA and those really difficult to treat staph infections.
Right.
So this is not something that oh man, these gators, they're supernatural. They just have a built-in immune system that's stronger or developed over time through their evolution of these environments. And I think that's what he's describing.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily, he clearly says, unfortunately, the restorative abilities of the creature were not enough to keep it alive, which, it could have been, it's a shame there isn't more information. Was it internal damage? Was there a broken limb? Was he witnessing bones fusing back together? We don't know. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well,
but he does actually go on to say something after the fact,
right?
A little further on in the report about these things being terrestrial and there's nothing magical about them, which I think is one of those things. I don't think it's supernatural at all. I think that when we have those conversations, I think that that's a very limited perspective. It's a television programmed perspective on things, man. You know what I mean? I see shows and vampires are regenerating, werewolves take silver bullets to be killed and all this stuff. And, you cut his arm off and it grows back. People like to picture that because that's the way we've been programmed by television and movies and science fiction and all this stuff. The fact is, the way this journal is laid out is this is a very real, very terrestrial, very evolved, based on what I'm seeing, human primate. Yeah. Maybe it fits somewhere in that family hominidae that, I don't know really where he's trying to put it in there, but it's terrestrial, man. I don't think this was anything supernatural.
No, I think probably I even hate making comments like this because if I can't say, well, this person said this or that person said that, I almost don't even want to say it. I have made a few contacts and asked them about this, and they said, yes, that's true. And I said, it sounds magical. They said, no, it's not magical. But yes, it's true. They have, the immune system's different than our immune system. Their ability to not regrow an arm but their ability to kind of self-heal is a little bit better than ours. But the other thing that might have just simply happened in this case is he was told their 3 were dead. And then he walked up and one was still kind of alive. And maybe he was trying to come up with an answer for, well, these guys said these things were dead. And it's kind of like when a person dies and then the doctors go in to bag him and tag him and the guy's not dead. All of a sudden, it's like for whatever reason he came back. And he may have seen something similar to that with that one creature and thought, he was trying to give an answer, I think, at that point when he really didn't have an answer. I think maybe simply what might have happened is it really wasn't dead. They thought it was, and he shows up and it's not quite dead yet.
I think that's definitely a possibility for sure. I look at the way the way he's worded this paragraph, and he says, after further investigation, I found that these creatures were not human. They, in fact, had remarkable rapid reparative process. Hence the reason one of the creatures seemed dead, but in fact was regenerating to a degree. It sounds like he did a little post-mortem investigation on this.
You're right.
It does sound like that. But at the same time, it does kind of make you wonder.
It does, yeah.
Some things that we don't as of yet understand because people like this were gagged.
Well, you're
if this is
right.
real, yeah. I look at the situation as, here's somebody. Was this actually the first one? The first time he got to see him?
I think this was the first time he saw him.
Okay. In the report, here we are. We've got a guy who is confronted with something like I have been, and he's like, "Holy shit! What's going on here?" You know what I mean? Yeah. And against all rationale, he's staring at something that maybe he's heard of in the past, but never bought into it. Never bought into it. And then here it is. It's on a slab. There's 3 of them. They're laying there. They're gigantic. It's everything he's heard of in the past, possibly. And he's trying to remain calm and stay scientific about this. Because, the bottom line is I don't care who you are. I've said this before. I don't care who you are. If you're confronted with this side of reality, it's difficult to process.
Yeah, I think you're
when
probably
you see him in the flesh, it's difficult to process,
Yeah,
but look at this, though. They, in fact, had a remarkable reparative process.
Well, and I know a lot of my members got to that point and stopped reading. But, I take the time, read the whole thing. Read exactly what he's saying, because he's not going off into some crazy... It doesn't sound that crazy to me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think we've been fed so much by the loons out there, that anything that has to do with paranormal or anything that sounds anything weird, most people bet. But I would just say read the whole thing.
Yes. When we were, just to take a step back for a second, he uses the word rapid. Rapid. That's the word he uses for that reparative process. And I think that's, if you look at, I know you've seen it, you've seen the species, I've seen the species, and I look at the way the species moved in my own encounter, it did not seem possible. Absolutely did not seem possible. So when I really started to try to ground myself, to try to understand what was in fact going on with my sighting and what I did see, when he jumped that trail and I saw the musculature and what was obviously a bone density, a bone structure that could support the musculature and the actual occurrence of him jumping the 20 feet and landing on his tippy toes silently with no thump. I thought he was going to wipe out. The last thing I expected in that hundredth of a second when he was in the air was that he was going to tippy-toe land like he just snuck up behind somebody or something. I never thought that would happen. I expected him to wipe out. When you start looking at these things in the physiology, it almost makes sense that if you take the amount of time that it takes a cut to heal on a human being with our size, with our physiology, with the difficulties that we have as human beings with our immune systems, and you look at something what is so obviously evolved to the environment here on planet Earth. I mean, this kind of stuff raises questions, man. You know what I mean? I mean, they're capable of physical movement that correlates to their size and musculature. It's difficult for people who haven't seen them to understand that. So what if their metabolism, it correlates to their size and physiology as well? And in having that, also, we're looking at immune system as being a part of that. And that it's just a more advanced immune system. And take it back down to a rational level, and let's really talk about the terrestrial side of this. It could be a really simple, perfectly natural explanation for this, right? But he uses the word rapid. This is the guy that's saying, I cut him up and I'm looking at all this. And he's using the word rapid. So, and if those other people were like saying, okay, well, these things are dead. Obviously, this thing was either unconscious or so close to being dead that it had a pulse that couldn't be detected. You would think if they're on, I mean, obviously they had to get there somehow, so they were transported. You had people picking these things up, putting them in trucks, doing something with them, right? So there's a bunch of people, not just a few, bunch of people thinking these things are dead. This is an interesting thing, man. This paragraph here, these couple paragraphs are very interesting, man.
It is interesting, and I think a lot of that happened in 62, because he later gives that date of 1962.
Okay.
But he said, I spent years studying these creatures, which are highly scientifically known as, and how do you want to pronounce that?
I'm using Cibidae telidae. It's probably telidae, but I'm using Cibidae telidae. That sounds correct. I looked up the family Cibidae, and or Cibidae, however the Latin is pronounced, but I think it's Cibidae telidae. Yeah, I was breaking it down into 4 syllables, and it's more difficult, so I just, I'm pronouncing it in 2 parts. It seems to be divided in 2 parts when I looked it up online. The family Cibidae, or Cibidae, however they're pronouncing it, Cibidae, I believe is how they pronounce it.
Did we ever get any information on what that means, or why they use Cibidae telidae?
Let's take a look now, man.
All right.
I mean, the bottom line is the family Cibidae.
Well, you take a look and I'll keep reading. So, Cibidae telidae is what we'll call it, confirming that they were most certainly not human. They are definitely of primate origin, but with traits seen in various species of primate, most of which were New World monkey. And I thought it was interesting to use the term New World monkey. I think through some of the research that we're reading through, they were starting to say basically that these things came from here. They didn't come from Asia. They didn't come from, because there's a term in the other document, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But there's a term in the other document where the biologist says that they call them Cibidae telidae. I think it's Arcos, which basically means bear. I looked that one up. That one means bear, or Arctic bear, and that one she's saying is the Yeti. And she's saying that, or the biologist is saying, Winsworth, might be a guy, is saying that didn't come from Asia. That actually is from here. It's from the United States. So that's where I think this term New World monkey is coming from.
Yeah, I've got it. I've just pulled up a real simple Wikipedia explanation for Cibidae, and it says it's one of 5 families of New World monkeys now recognized. It includes the capuchin monkeys and squirrel monkeys. These species are found throughout tropical and subtropical South and Central America. Cibidae monkeys are arboreal animals that only rarely travel to the ground. They generally are small monkeys. Interesting. Ranging in size up to that of a brown capuchin, which I'm not sure. 33 to 56 centimeters. Whoa! That's really small. They're omnivorous. They have a dental formula. I think that a lot of this stuff is, these are some smaller monkeys. These are smaller monkeys that this thing is classified with. That's interesting.
That is interesting. He said the Cibidae telidae, found in San Antonio, Texas area, very much howl, like a howler monkey. quite frightening at night to hear. At one point early in my analysis, I found a great deal of similarity between these Bigfoot creatures and the howler monkey.
You know, he basically he goes on to say right here that they were most certainly not human.
Right.
I wonder, and he says, I spent years studying these creatures, which are scientifically known as Cebidae, okay? Confirming that they were most certainly not human. I wonder, because he makes no mention about any live contact. I think he only examined the corpses. Is that correct?
No, there was an incident, and this, we're jumping around the document, but this is an important point. He talks about them being in captivity. He talks about them being kept in captivity, and this is going to go to another point that's probably going to piss the audience off, but one of the things he says is that the U.S. government was basically embarrassed that they died in captivity, and they couldn't figure out why they were dying in captivity. It's not like they were abusing them. It's not like they were... But he, basically in this letter, he talks about they die in captivity. There's something in their brain that... I don't know if they just stop eating, they become very docile when they're in captivity. And there's two things to that. There was... I don't know if you've ever heard this encounter, Mark. Back in, I want to say, 1830... there was a group of guys and a group of local Native Americans that tracked and hunted down a juvenile, or what they think is a juvenile type creature. It was still a monster in their eyes. You know, back in 1830, I think the average height of a person was about 5'3", and I think the thing they captured was almost 7 foot. But it was small in comparison to what we think of Sasquatch. But they hunted this thing down, and they went and they tied it up and brought it back to camp, and it was sitting all tight, chained up. And one of the guys that in that encounter said that he became very docile and his eyes glazed over, almost like he was depressed, and just sat there. And they would try and feed him and he wouldn't eat, and he just became motionless. He became, like almost like you'd see a person just staring off in the distance. And they make mention of that in that encounter. And I think that creature ended up either later dying or something, but where are we at in this document?
Well, I think where we're at now is, from his point of view in the journal, is he's about to discover something new. He says, at one point in my early analysis, I found a great deal of similarity between these Bigfoot creatures and the howler monkeys. That was until 1962. And then he's talking about in 62...
Well, one point I'll make before I go on. Sorry, Mark. Some people were saying the Bigfoot creature, and this is 1962. Why is he saying Bigfoot type creature? I think portions of this were written later, in like the 90s. I think he wrote portions of this. But I just want to make that point.
No, well, that makes sense. He says in late 1962, early 1963, I was notified of a large human-like creature by the Redding Forest Service folks in California. I arranged for transport of the body to my primary location in Colorado. It was reported to me that the body was found under a large tree and had been violently struck by lightning and blown to the ground, apparently killing this large creature. During my investigation, I found the animal to be very similar to those I had studied in the Bandera County area of Texas, with some marked differences. This northern version of Cebidae seemed to have the same New World monkey attributes I noted in the Texas animals, known today as Cebidae texicanus or C. texicanus. However, there were unique traits found in this Pacific Northwest animal. You know what? I got to stop there for just a second. It's interesting to me that he actually confirmed and documented and studied the species for the U.S. government, according to this journal. And the very first cadavers, the very first type specimens, were from the South, not the Pacific Northwest. I just have to go ahead and put a nod into this wonderful Southern Bigfooting area that we have down here in Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia. I'm sorry, I had to do that, man. It strikes me as odd.
And you're right, and it's weird that it is odd that it comes from Texas, but, because it didn't really, I've had guys that have had encounters like in the 80s and 90s that were shocked they were in Texas. That was the last place they would have expected. And I don't think a lot of people in Texas really came out and talked about some of their encounters until about the last 30 years. Prior to that, it's really hard to find any sort of archived encounter in Texas. You know what I mean? Beyond what the natives had to say. So that is interesting that they chose Texas. The other thing too he talks about the storm and where the other one they got the body from.
Yeah.
That was a real storm that actually, he has the dates right on that. It was like 170 mile an hour winds that were going through there at that time. And so
you've had confirmation of that.
Yeah, there was a real storm that went through there, and that is the date of.
And it went through in Redding Forest area.
And it went through the Redding, and when I went back and looked at the report, I think it was 170 mile an hour winds that were going through there.
This thing keeps getting confirmed.
Yeah, so I mean that's a real, that's a real date. That storm really happened.
Also, I mean, there's a little thing here that I want to point out where he says I arranged for transport of the body to my primary location in Colorado. That statement is very telling that there are a great many individuals involved in this situation, and that he is, in fact, orchestrating or in charge of some of this. I mean, he uses it as if he says things, and the way he's saying things, his point of view on this is that he was the guy. I'm arranging for transport of the body. I'm, at my primary location, implying that there are secondary and other locations. And there's a primary location to examine a body.
Right.
It's interesting that this is going on. Obviously, he's traveling to other areas to examine these things as well. All right. During my investigation, I found the animal to be very similar to those that I had studied in Bandera County, in the Bandera County area of Texas, with some marked differences. This northern version of Cebidae telidae seemed to have the same New World monkey attributes I notated in the Texas animals, or C. texicanus, right? However, there were unique traits found in this Pacific Northwest animal known as C. nerteros pacificus, including thumbs that were not entirely opposable, as we see in modern humans. The C. nerteros pacificus entire hand was truly designed for grip, including proximal pads, making the hand somewhat hooked-like, having flat nails, resulting in my theory that these northern creatures developed an evolutionary arboreal nature, while the Texas subfamily developed a troglocene nature. What he's talking about here is the difference between, and this is a noticeable difference in eyewitness accounts, as well as, and he doesn't get into the anatomy itself, but there's differences in anatomy as well, in musculature, between the difference between a mountain Sasquatch and a flatland Sasquatch. You got no mountains in Texas. And so the need for, or the development or evolution of the hands from brachiating uphill. Brachiating uphill in mountainous areas, right. Humans do that. Yeah. You pull yourself up. I mean, that's a very, this is well noted. It jives. He's saying very clearly, there's a difference between the ones that aren't living in mountainous areas in their hands. You know what I mean? And that rings true in research.
Basically what he's saying, a dumbed down version of what he's saying is they change depending on their environment. Or there's different types based on their environment. Basically is what he's saying.
Environmental evolution, yeah.
And I see that too with witness encounters. What someone is describing in Texas is night and day compared to what they're talking about in Washington. Not night and day, but I mean, there's subtle differences to what they're talking about in Washington State, what they're talking about in Florida, Georgia.
Yeah, and the things that I see down here, and the evidence that I see in the tracks that we find, and then the ones that we've caught on films, is that they appear to be severely dehydrated. Severely dehydrated. Their faces are just knobby and bony and very thin. I don't know. I've never seen one outside of the state of Florida, so I can't speak to that intelligently. When they see the facial structure, but it makes sense. I mean, it's so hot in the summertime.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, man. They're probably. With the hair. I mean, come on. I wish he mentioned if there was something in here about the way they process heat from their body. They expel heat. Like, do they have an advanced? I'm sure they do, being that they have what he described as a rapid heating immune system type of going on. If they had some type of an advanced cooling thing, because these things are all over down here in the South, and it gets hot, bro. You know what I mean? And you're covered in hair. Are you kidding me, man? Yeah. Obviously that's got something to do with the stink going on. But he also talks about having glands,
Right.
So that's interesting. All of this is interesting, man.
It is interesting. And like I said, there's little things in this document, at least for me, when I read it, I think this is probably true. This probably is a real document. Just because of little things like that he mentions. The subtle differences between these creatures.
I can tell you this. Whoever wrote this has seen what I've seen.
Yeah.
What we're seeing in the field, what we're finding, he's seen this. And that's strange.
Yeah, well,
to me.
I think he's getting the opportunity to look at him dead and up close. I know in here he talks about this Pacific Northwest creature found in 1962, 1963 also had scent glands on her forearms. So, he's looking at a dead corpse. To actually get to the scent glands, being that they're on her forearms. Not only was this creature smashed by a large tree, but she was also badly burned with some areas of lightning prints on her exposed skin. So that's interesting. That's basically the one he's looking at. He's getting an opportunity to, like we were just saying, basically look at one from Oregon, California. Now I'm looking at ones in Texas, and he's starting to see marked differences. And you can see later how he tries to classify what he's seeing, in the different types.
Absolutely, that's apparent through here. And you can see he's trying to draw conclusions about the death itself as well.
He's talking about the additional padding on their feet, which they use to climb trees by clinging on the tree with its hands and supported weight. So he's starting to see the padding in their feet and how that's being used. And I think he said this thing was 20 feet up a tree, didn't he?
Well, he says it did seem as though the animal had fallen to the ground first, with the tree falling on top of her afterward, but the evidence as to whether the animal fell first or with the tree is inconclusive. So he couldn't definitively say that. However, it is clear lightning struck the tree at a decent height, a descent height of over 20 feet. Therefore, the animal must have been clinging to the tree at the time of the lightning strike. More evidence of the arboreal nature. He's trying to back his conclusions up. He really is. He's trying to solidify. That almost implies that there are that he's aware of other people looking into this.
Like he's in competition with someone. He's trying to draw conclusions.
He really is trying to solidify conclusions for his taxonomy. Yeah. It's apparent, and that does imply that there are others, possibly in other parts of the country, doing the same thing he's doing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I found it interesting. I think it's the next paragraph where he talks about the jaws.
Okay, it says the C. Nerteros pacificus also had an additional medial padding on the feet, which it would use to climb trees by clinging to the tree with its hands and support its weight. Here he is hypothesizing or theorizing. Both the C. notaris pacificus and C. texicanus have oversized lower jaws, including massive sternocleidomastoid musculature. This must have been due to their rugged diet and, moreover, their need to crush bones. Their lower dentum at first looked as a second row of molars, but after years of research and examining the dead bodies of these animals, I've found that the lower molars are simply oversized or fused, resulting in massive bone-crushing tools. Fused. He uses the term fused.
I thought that part was interesting, you know, where he's talking about the oversized teeth, and, you know, like what you and I had talked about before in the past, they pull up these giant skulls out of the ground, and they always say they have double rows of teeth. And here he's saying it appeared that they had double rows of teeth, but they weren't actually double rowed. And he talks about the size of the jaw. You know how many witnesses I've talked to where they said they couldn't believe how, the ones that have gotten close enough, they say that lower jaw is freaking huge. I mean, it could fit a softball inside its mouth. It's so big. And here he's describing the same thing witnesses are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the first time that statement about the jaw really hit home to me, and it was an additional confirmation in my son's sighting. One of the first things that he said to me once the situation calmed down and it was over, I said, "What did you see?" And he said, "It had a huge lower jaw. Dad, this thing," and he was holding his hands way out. And when he drew the picture, you know, I mean, it's like, it looks ridiculous. You know what I mean? And I think that this is yet again another confirmation with eyewitnesses and what we see on film from the research community. The odd one that's actually really real, and what we're seeing in our research as well, man. I mean, it's the same thing. You know, both of the things that I've had here in Palm Beach County, in the Corbett area, this guy has a huge lower jaw, man. I mean, the distance between the bottom of his nose and the top of his lip is at least twice of what ours is, if not 3 times. And it's just the bone that comes out on the side, what I saw, it almost looks, it gives him, the one that I keep seeing, it makes him look like he's got chimpanzee in him, even though he has the hooded nose. So, I mean, this is like another point that it confirms on with research, you know? And, I mean, I can't even believe we're having this conversation. I mean, this is an incredible, I don't see how somebody could make this up, being that it confirms on so many things. I do understand that you would have to have seen, you have to be an eyewitness or a researcher who has seen the species, or you would have to be a researcher or an eyewitness to understand me saying that, I think. I think that I can understand why people won't buy that this is legitimate. But if you're an eyewitness, this was written by somebody who has seen this, for sure. He's seen a real one, because all of this stuff is like, I mean, you know, he talks about the fused bone-crushing stuff. That's odd, man. That's odd. The dentum, he uses the term dentum. I mean, that's a scientific perspective in that term. I mean, this is like just more and more confirmation with like everything in this thing, man. It's like, it just blows me away. It blows me away, man. You know, I'll tell you something else, Wes. This is kind of scary. It really gets me thinking.
I guess where I get lost is why no one has paid attention to this document. No one.
I have no idea why. Upon seeing this yesterday for the first time and just scanning it, I was struck by at least 10 different things that confirm in my research, my own research, and my sightings. Yeah. And it's significant, I think, you know. Like I said, I don't know who wrote this, but they have seen. At least on the outside stuff he's describing. You know what I mean? I mean, I wish I could interview this guy, man. My God, I wish I could interview this guy just to even talk to him.
I think this guy is actually he knows what he's talking about. He's seen. There's little tiny details. It's like the Albert Otzman story I was telling you about. There's little tiny things that he says that either he's a really good writer and it was coincidental that he knew stuff, or it really happened to him. And it's kind of like the same thing when you're reading this document. There's little tiny details that make you stop and go, this wasn't just written by some guy wanting to create a hoax. There's too much little details. But go ahead, man. I didn't mean to.
Okay, so due to their jaw size and bone-crushing dentum, it's also clear that all subfamily of this creature are omnivorous, predaceous, and opportunistic. We did find that the female killed during the Columbus Day storm was pregnant with monozygotic embryos. All female Cebidae have investigated throughout my career that have been pregnant have monozygotic embryos. This again incorporating additional evidence of a New World monkey relationship.
I think that's what creates twins, but what he's saying is they can't, is what I get from it. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's saying derives from a single ovum. Okay, so it is. It's single egg.
Yeah, so
it's single egg.
In that,
it's single egg.
Basically, what he's saying there is they don't have the ability to have twins.
Well, I'm not sure, because then isn't this other document saying that?
Yeah, there was some argument between him and this Wentworth, who was a biologist, and but we can come back to that.
I look at a lot of what he's talking about as very scary, and I think that it actually, this is where it starts to fall into your realm, where you're talking to eyewitnesses who've had violent encounters. And I think you even had sent me a report about a guy getting his arm bit off. And you know, I don't know, was that somehow attached to somebody in this report, or was that something that somebody dug up in back in the crushing bone?
That was basically that was dug up. That was an old encounter. That was separate from this, but what's interesting is in that encounter, he makes reference to specific things the Miller doc's talking about and the Wentworth doc. So they all kind of come together. I mean, he's talking about his encounter, having his arm bit off. He's describing the creature's lower jaw. He's describing it getting in a tree. He's describing how it's moving.
Right.
And he makes reference to that creature, and he uses the same term as the Miller doc. And the Miller doc uses the same term as the Wentworth doc. So it's like three separate things, but they're all adding to the conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know what else is interesting about this? This paragraph was where he talks about, he uses a plural here. He says that we did find that the female killed during the Columbus Day storm was pregnant with monozygotic embryos, plural. It's possible that she did have twins, but they were in separate ovum.
I gotcha.
Or is that the right way to put it? Yeah, I guess it is. I mean, the Wentworth lady was talking about they can't have twins.
Yeah, she was saying they could, but that was a part she was disagreeing with on Miller on, because Miller was saying they couldn't, and she was saying they actually can. They have. So
obviously, this Wentworth must have examined some corpses as well, correct?
Well, and it's interesting too. If you read the next paragraph, I think it's in the next paragraph. He talks about few fellow scientists of mine have disagreed with his findings.
Okay, due to my investigations of the 1950s bodies in Texas and the 1960s Pacific Northwest Columbus Day storm body, I submitted to the Department of Agriculture that this is a new Platyrini species and that a new family under the Parv order created. Fellow scientists of mine disagreed, given the fact that the creatures we examined in both cases were obviously bipedal and Catarrhini in terms of their nostrils facing downward, old world monkeys. Okay. So they're arguing about, they're having the same argument that the Bigfoot research community is having.
Right.
And I mean literally. He's trying to classify them as monkeys, and they're saying it has a hooded nose and the nostrils are facing downward like a man, regardless of being covered with hair, regardless of your findings with the pads on the hands and the feet. This is a human type species in the family Hominae. He's doing everything he can to not put this species in the family Hominae, is what I'm seeing throughout this entire thing.
Yeah, and I think
I wonder if he was poised intentionally to do that. Think about that.
Yeah, I don't know. He later goes on to say he won the debate on that, didn't he? In the next paragraph.
I don't fully understand that yet, but I think we're going to go over that and we'll try to come to some type of conclusion about it. I mean, according to the other document that you sent, it wasn't fully, you know what I mean? The biologist seems to think that she won some argument as well, doesn't she?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think that that's indicative or typical within the scientific community, where one guy is going, well, my paper passed peer review and it says this, and then the other guy's going, well, my paper passed peer review and it says the exact opposite.
Yeah.
So where are we at? Well, we're still nowhere. You know what I mean? That's like a geneticist saying that humans are 250,000 years old, and then evolutionists are saying that human species have been around for 1 million years or whatever they say. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's taken us 4 million years, you know. So, and both their papers have been passed.
Right.
So what do we think? You know.
Yeah, there definitely is a debate going on. I think that the part that's interesting, I think, is the next part. And I'll skip the paragraph. He talks about he won the debate, that their nostril breathing position. Basically, they're arguing where the nose was at. It sounds like what you just said. It sounds like they're arguing about the nose. He said, I have since retired, and I know some new University of Utah-based scientists in Idaho who understand the genetics a little bit better. Their findings are only supporting my original theorems, or at the least, I am told. These molecular biologists will soon understand the similarities with humans once the human genome project is completed. As a result, I still refer to the Sasquatch species. And what's interesting is he gives a list, these 6 different types and their subfamilies. So he's just describing.
Wes, can I just stop you for 1 second?
Yeah, of course.
We skipped over something that I think is very important in confirmation, and also extremely interesting. He goes right after he's talking about the argument. He says, however, okay, this is how it reads. Fellow scientists of mine disagreed, given the fact that these creatures were examined in both cases, were obviously bipedal and Catarrhini in terms of their nostrils facing downward, old world monkeys. However, he goes on to say, the juveniles we've examined are much more Platyrrhini in terms of nostril breadth and position. I won't debate in the end due to the fact that no evidence thus far demonstrates that these creatures crossed over from the old world. I won. I won the debate in the end due to the fact that no evidence thus far demonstrates that these creatures crossed over from the old world, but are simply new world monkeys adapting to the various stages, areas within North and South America. You know what? He's talking about a different physical appearance in juveniles.
Right.
And that as they age, something changes.
They grow into themselves, I think.
And here's the thing. I have on film right now a juvenile from Myakka State Park that's in our film, The Unavoidable Truth, that has a completely different facial structure than what I'm seeing in our more developed, and the ones we've got on film that appear to be older. I'll say it that way. The nose is completely different. It's possible. I mean, okay, let me just say it from my research. What we have on film is that they look more monkey-like as a juvenile than they do when they get, I think, like you said, they grow into their bodies, and then that hooded nose becomes more pronounced and developed. is what we're seeing. And this actually, again, is confirming that. And you can see that in our films. You can see that in our films, which is, that blows my mind.
Yeah, and even people,
and again, here it is. Somebody who's seen this is saying this again.
Yeah, even people that have seen juveniles, they said it looked like a little monkey. It looked like a little tiny chimpanzee, but there was something different about it. But it basically was a monkey running around. And I think they just kind of have to grow into themselves. Maybe that's what the argument was, that as juveniles, they look like this, but as adults, they look like this. And maybe it's just as simple as they got to grow into everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there obviously are some really strange things going on inside this being. I mean, we've got some really strange stuff with their immune system or their reparative systems. Yeah, and then, I mean, based on this, what is this, a journal, a letter? I mean, based on this information, this is incredible. I mean, it's incredible. But it continues to show itself that this person, whoever wrote this, man, I'm telling you, I mean, splitting it up into these categories that you're getting ready to go over, this is incredible, man. I had difficulty with this New World thing. Like, I was thinking, the way we talked about this yesterday was that it was post-flood and pre-flood, because some of the descriptions, but then, last night we had a conversation where we were talking about actually New World being a place, North and South America. Is that correct?
Right.
I'm wondering still, the paragraph you just read.
You're breaking up. What'd you say?
Well, he says here, fellow scientists of mine disagree, given the fact that the creatures we examined in both cases were obviously bipedal in terms of their nostrils, and Catarrhini in terms of their nostrils facing downward. Old world monkeys. I mean, it brings into question, like, old world, what's he talking about? Africa?
Yeah.
He's talking about Africa.
No, I'm saying, yeah, it makes you wonder what I don't know what he's referring to there.
I'm not a scientist, and this is definitely not my discipline, and this is all kind of, I'm playing catch up. These are things that need to be thoroughly investigated, and I intend to devote some serious time to this terminology and understanding it, because I think that a lot of this is key here. I mean, this is a first run for us, but I think, I think people need to know in detail the ins and outs of what's going on here with this.
Yeah.
Just like I said, I'm scanning and I'm getting confirmation on stuff that I'm seeing in our films, and I've seen with my own two eyes. Go ahead with the classifications.
Well, I know he's breaking them up, his classifications, which is kind of interesting. But he said, I've since retired. I know some new University of University of Utah, based scientists in Idaho. I read that part, but basically they're breaking them up into classifications. Cebidae, Telidae, and then he says Arctos. And he goes down a whole list of how he's... I wish when he did this list, he'd break them down, like we find this one in this region, and he does a tiny bit. That very first one, the Arctos, he's talking about the Yeti. And there was another disagreement in some of these documents on the Yeti. Basically, the biologist Wentworth is saying these creatures didn't come from the land bridge. They were already here. And I think that's where the term New World Monkey comes from. This is technically the New World. She's saying they were already here. The Arctos, I think is how you pronounce it, the Cebidae, Telidae, Arctos, that means bear or Arctic bear. And I think that he's referring to that particular one as the Yeti. The biologist and him later get in an argument. She's saying it left the New World and resided in the Himalayas. It wasn't from there. And so it's just interesting how they break down each one of these. And that's going to be part of the research and the investigation. But breaking down what these definitions mean. Obviously, Texacanus, he's talking about the Texican version. He describes that one earlier. The Pacificanus, he's describing the one in the Pacific Northwest that fell in the storm. In some of these, you can kind of tell why they named them certain things, but it's interesting that they break it down to 6 subfamilies.
Yeah, and here's the thing now. I'm taking a look at Teleday online right now, and I got to tell you, it's a little shocking that the first thing that pops up under the Latin suffix that he's using for this are reptiles. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with the regenerative stuff that he's saying he found in these Sasquatch that he examined. He's talking about basically regenerative primate is what I get out of this, or a primate that can regenerate is what Cibidae Teledae, upon first glance at definitions online, is what it comes to. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's interesting that Teledae is a reptilian reference. That's a little odd.
That would make sense. Most reptiles can regenerate like that. Regrow.
Yeah. I don't know that. I mean, is the name itself a nod to the fact that these guys can actually do that?
Makes you wonder.
I mean, that's strange, man. It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know the Wentworth doc, the biologist wanted to, instead of Cibidae Teledae, she wanted to call it Primus. But she was happy with the rest of the terms after that. But she didn't want Cibidae Teledae, she wanted Primus to put that in there instead of that.
I'm looking at the family Teledae right now. And it's got the tegu in it and whiptails. There's quite a few different lizards here. All of which have that regeneration aspect in common. This is fascinating. I wonder why she wanted to call it Primus.
Yeah, we can get into that, but that's what she wanted to call it, was Primus. She didn't like Cibidae Teledae.
Yeah.
Let's see here. He says, any of these species found outside the New World must have originated from and migrated out of the New World. So he's basically saying these things were already here. They didn't migrate in. They were already here. And I think that's why he keeps calling it a New World monkey, because they were already here. He says, all of my experiences with this primate have been post-mortem. Save a few unique experiences in the wild. To my knowledge, a live specimen has never been captured, except for once in Northern Research Station in California. However, the animal did not survive in captivity and died after only a few days. I, of course, and this is where you see some ego here, I, of course, examined the body. There are many rumors that this captured Sasquatch was somehow magical and could shapeshift, and that's why it couldn't be found. The truth is, the folks at the Northern Research Station were very devastated and embarrassed that this live specimen died so quickly after being in captivity. So no, they are not magical. They are highly intelligent primates. Having one die in captivity is very difficult to witness due to the human nature and feeling about the species. In reality, captivity will never be realistic for the Cibidae Teledae because of their size and complex brains. Similar to captive white sharks, the species cannot thrive in captivity and quickly die as a protective mechanism. Now that's interesting.
Yeah, that also, gives us some dates on this stuff, because that information, I said that yesterday, the white shark information wasn't known about white sharks until the mid-'80s, somewhere in there. Mid-'80s. I looked it up last night to confirm it. I remember they actually had a documentary on it where they captured a juvenile white shark and put it in the Monterey Bay Aquarium in Monterey, California, and didn't do well. So I think they either released it or it died. I'm pretty sure they released it. But that kind of, lets you know that this was written after mid-1980s.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because some of the dates he starts to reference in the document start to get more towards the 80s. He talks about the Mount St. Helens eruption. I spent a great deal of my career as an expert in the federal government concerning CBD, Telidae, and throughout the world, including the bodies recovered in the 80s due to the Mount St. Helens eruption. We made many recommendations to protect the species, but the Department of Interior has constant concern regarding the impact of such a decision due to the vast number of areas these species inhabits. So that's kind of interesting. Basically, they're saying...
Well, look at the next sentence. Such a decision would have potential negative impacts on the natural resource industry. There's their motivation right there. We're talking about logging. That's what we're talking about. What are we talking about? We're talking about logging. I mean, that's been a well-documented opinion about, why they're not coming out with this. I mean, it's not like, it really is like, people understand what's going on. I mean, a lot of this stuff, the research community has confirmed, and no one has believed them. You know what I'm saying? Like, you look at the research community over the years, and a lot of these things that this guy's saying, people have seen this, Eyewitnesses are telling you this thing's got a giant jaw, man. And people are going, that's impossible, Like, here it is, I mean, this is just like another... I don't know, man. To me, it's definitely. I'm starting to really think this is, a legitimate guy here. He's telling the truth. This is I mean, I wish we could get the manuscript itself. You think that's possible? You think you can pull some of your Wes Germer shit on this one?
I'll try, man. I'm working.
My God, dude! If you got that manuscript, come on.
I think it's interesting. The Forestry Service is now working more towards creating protective wildlife refuges for the CBD Telidae. So that's kind of interesting. They're trying to set aside land, which will never work, but they're trying to set aside land. It seems like the next logical step they would take in trying to protect these, create these, and he goes into some of that. He actually talks about real places that have become protective wildlife sanctuaries that aren't open to the public.
Well, you know what else, Wes, is when he says this, he says clearly that he was talking with the DOI on this, the Department of Interior, and that they have a constant concern regarding the impact of such a decision. Basically, he's talking about we need to get this species protected in their habitat. He's saying what so many of us have said. Listen, this is important. This is potentially the most important zoological discovery in the history of man, and you need to do something about this. And they're going, whoa, 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 putting the brakes on them. What this guy's doing in this paragraph, the way I'm seeing it, is essentially showing us or telling us how this cover-up was birthed from the beginning. Because he then goes on to say in that last sentence, the U.S. Forestry Service is now working more towards creating protective wildlife refuges for the CBD Telidae, which is, in fact, as you just said, he goes on to confirm and talks about the dates that they're going to be creating these things. I've witnessed this over the course of 30 years of living here in Palm Beach County, that these habitats have been set aside. They are designated natural areas. They are designated areas, a lot of them, that you're not allowed to enter regardless of the fact that the public is supposedly owns it. And that this is where we're catching these guys on film. This is where I've had my sightings. This is like, again, more confirmation, Wes, that this guy is on the money, on the level.
The handwriting, they couldn't read any of some of this stuff in here, but he says that the Forestry Service and Department of Interior is recognizing now that the natural resource industry is not the economic center it once was. So that's kind of interesting. That they look at it and go, they're trying to figure out the impact.
Yeah, it looks like that. And you know something? It sounds to me in that one paragraph there that they're saying, okay, so how can we deal with this? And the Forestry Service steps up and says, listen, why don't we do this? Why don't we create protective wildlife refuges? We won't say this is what's going on yet. We'll get the habitat set aside, get everything in place first, and then where you're reading now, it talks about after everything's in place and people already know, then we'll come out and we'll let people know what's going on.
And that's exactly what they said. Basically set all of that up. Then the decision was made. There was a 20-year plan to incorporate all wildlife protection areas throughout many areas of the United States to ensure...
Yeah, well, I mean, here in Palm Beach County, in the 90s, after I got out of the military, at one point I went to work for a friend who owned a fence company, a fencing company. And we were contracted by Palm Beach County to build fences along a road, a highway called Beeline Highway. And it runs west all the way to Lake Okeechobee, right, through Palm Beach County, and it runs right through the swamp and basically all their habitat. On both sides of this road is a vast swamp. It's the primary forest corridor that all these sightings have been happening. Now, we built this fence. Put 9 miles of chain link fence, 8-foot high chain link fence, along this side of this road, Beeline Highway. And when we were done putting the fence up, we went back at the beginning start point to start putting the barbed wire up because they wanted barbed wire. And we put up about 300 or 400 yards of the shit. And a guy came from the county and came up to our crew and said, "You're putting the barbed wire the wrong way." And we were looking at the guy like, "What are you talking about, man? The barbed wire always faces out to keep people out." He goes, No. Barbed wire is going to be faced in this case. And I remember my crew chief was going, "Why would you do that? What are you trying to do, keep something in?" And the guy's like, "Listen, just put the barbed wire facing in." And we were like looking at each other like, "What's going on?" You know what I mean? But I can tell you that the very first encounter I had just left the Florida Wildlife Conservation Commission's main office. As I was leaving the main offices where I had gone in on an investigation trying to find out about a report from the BFRO that happened here in Palm Beach County. They denied me. They said, "We don't keep that kind of report," whatever. I was leaving the place, and I was driving back along that highway that I had put that fence up in the 90s, and I saw a spot in the fence coming out of the swamp in this area. It's one of these natural protected areas where a 15 to 18-foot tree had been dragged well over 100 yards and thrown on top of this fence from the inside of the park, from the inside of the forest, of the preserve. And I pulled over and I went and I looked, and here it is. There's this drag mark, and it went all the way through this foot-deep water, over 100 yards from the tree line. There's no trees in this area. Something had dragged it from the inside of the thing. You're talking about how can they keep these guys in? That somebody was trying to get out of that park because they knocked that fence down with this tree, and it was dragged there. I could see the tracks and everything, and the bark was worn off the top of it. The entire top of this pine tree was worn off where something had been obviously getting out of there, and it was crushed down to almost, I don't know, maybe about 5 feet from 8 feet. So it had gone down significantly with this tree. This thing was gigantic, and it was 20 inches in diameter. You know what I mean? And I kept thinking to myself, I'm looking for tractor tracks, going through the swamp, and there was none of that. There was a single trail. And so I don't think they can keep them in. And there's evidence here that they're doing whatever they want. They're going wherever they want. I took that as evidence. Now, it was within 20 minutes where I was getting screamed at by 1,000 yards from where that tree was. So that was my first encounter. That was how I found it. Evidence, I looked at it as, well, somebody's here.
Yeah.
I don't think they can, Wes. I think they can keep them in.
No, I think it was probably one of those ideas that looked great on paper, but I think when they implemented it, it looked better on paper than it did work in real life, because you can't keep these things confined. And you think honestly, and that's the part that makes me wonder, I think anyone with half a brain would realize these things are so big. He's examined these things. He knows how physically strong they are. He can see the musculature. He describes the jaw. You think he'd be first to speak up and go, "You can't keep these things confined to an area. You can't. That's not going to work." You'd think he would have known that.
He actually probably did. I think at this point, Wes, I think this guy is just basically, it's out of his hands. I mean, when he starts talking about the DOI and how the DOI is raising all these questions about potential issues, financial issues, right off the bat, which really concerns me. First of all, if the document is accurate, if the guy's telling the truth, they're concerned about money. They're not. I mean, the Department of the Interior is directly responsible for regulating our national parks, which are owned by the general public. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, what are we doing here? Whose country is this in the first place? You know what I mean? Like, again, we see evidence of like, well, let's look out for the interests of this and that. And they may be in a roundabout way looking out for financial or economic interests is what they say. But again, we see the ridiculous notion, as you said, that you're going to control something that's 3 times the size of a man and obviously capable of eating somebody. You know what I mean?
Right.
And has the power to do things. I mean, come on, man. You know what I mean? Like these things, you know, I mean, this guy's confirmed so much in his report. I think at this point, Wes, it was out of his hands. I think they started saying things.
Here's the interesting part, this next paragraph, because everything he says in this next portion regarding this government canyon state natural area is true. And the dates that he says certain things will happen are true as far as the expansion of this natural area. And this is just east of Houston. But everything he's saying about this park that the government created, he talks about it, it was going to be created at the state. It was going to be expanded at the state. It would be expanded again on this date. All of that actually happened. All of that's real. And that park is real. And the way he describes it in the document, he said, I was upset by the decision because the first location the species was identified scientifically was Texas. I petitioned, and as a result, the government canyon state natural area will be protected, open to the public, and expanded in Bexar County, Texas. The long-term plan will be to open each of these designated natural areas to the public. Once all of the designated Cividae Telidae natural areas are open to the public, the Department of Interior will announce that these species as an endangered New World primate. I'm not sure if this will happen. The government canyon state natural areas will not be open to the public until 2005, then later expanded in 2009, and then again in 2012. This will all happen long after I'm dead, I'm afraid. But he's right, all of it, they did expand it in those years, and I almost think they were telling... Here's a guy that spent his whole life studying these things. Here's a guy that dedicated his life to this.
He got wrapped up.
And I think he wanted some sort of end to come to this.
So bad.
And I almost think they fed him the story. I honestly think they fed him the story to shut him up. To say, hey, we're going to open this to the public. This is all coming, down the drain. I think all this was BS. They told him this to keep him happy.
Well, I mean, they didn't technically lie to him. They just maybe exaggerated. Because the bottom line is they have created these natural areas. They just haven't come out. But then again, too, we don't know when the 20-year period started accurately and when it ended. So we could very well be, if this document is correct, if what he's saying is correct, we could very well be on the precipice of this thing being announced. And if you look at the subject's popularity, the amount of eyewitnesses, and look who you are, right? The amount of eyewitnesses, how many people you talk to. This stuff is at a fever pitch right now. There's a feeling, there's an energy about this subject now with the general public. There's people who are now educated that this is probably going on, regardless of their own personal beliefs. You can't dismiss all of this. So many credible eyewitnesses, so many. We could be on the precipice of this actually happening, Les.
Being announced, yeah.
Oh my God! Because look, everything's in place now. He's using specific times. Am I correct in saying that the researchers that are associated with bringing this to your website have actually listed up, and those dates were accurate.
Yeah, I've even double checked those dates, and those dates are accurate. It was expanded.
Set up? No
Yeah,
shit.
yeah,
Yeah, man.
exactly.
So what if now it's 2015? It's 3 years after, and they've maybe been conducting some studies to make sure that it's a manageable resource, as they probably put it. You know what I mean? And they do have all this wildlife management going on in these actual areas. I mean, come on, man. You can go look at all that stuff. We have those areas set aside, designated as natural areas. The exact terminology he uses here, and those areas have been set up in the last decade here in Palm Beach County. I mean, this is like happening. This guy's like...
Well, I think it's interesting, the last portion of what he says. He talks about living in Colorado and how he hopes that the government will stay true to their word and create these natural areas for them. He says, otherwise, a scarce food resource available to the Cebidea will result in a more opportunistic feeding behavior and a closer interaction between humans and Cebidea. These creatures and human beings simply do not coexist. So, I mean, and that kind of goes back to a lot of things that, I've said on the show in the past. They generally don't want anything to do with you. They don't want a hug. They don't want a kiss on the cheek and a pet on the head and to be fed an apple. They really don't. And that's basically what he's saying. That last sentence he says, basically he's saying these areas need to be set aside. Otherwise, humans are in trouble, because these things are opportunistic feeding behaviors. And the closer they are to humans, they simply can't coexist. So create these natural areas. Don't make them public. Put these creatures in these areas and then announce it, and everything will be A-okay. But I don't think, this guy's book smart, but he's not real street smart. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Like in one sense, he's saying, hey, listen, they have a propensity for cannibalism.
Right.
Or it wouldn't technically be cannibalism. It would just be predator and we, the prey.
Right.
But in the end of the day, at the same time, he's saying, that's okay. Just put them in this area and, set up a tour with some bulletproof glass and everything will be fine. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay. You can still go hunting,
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
It's an interesting doc, man. And I was kind of iffy on doing a show on this because I got a million other things to get to. But it is, and I know you're in the same boat, but it is interesting to read this thing because of how it reads. And we can go into the Wentworth doc another time.
Yeah.
But there is a lot more to this than face value. The guys on the website, the guys and gals, have done a great job at researching this and backing it up. Did the guy go to Harvard? Yes. Did the guy go to Yale? Yes. Did the guy exist? Yes. Did he work for the federal government? Yes. And then this kind of comes out. And there's just too many details in this document. I know if you weren't really into Bigfoot, you'd probably glaze over this and be like, probably some of the audience has glazed over what you and I are saying. But if you read what's being said here, I just don't think it's a hoax. I really don't. Now, my gut tells me it's not.
My gut's telling me it's not, just because I'm witnessing everything this guy's describing. Especially the wildlife management. This last paragraph, come on, man. And it's funny because Melanie in the field one day said they're probably doing all of this because the bush Indians are here, because the Bigfoot are in here. The wildlife management practices, she goes, it doesn't make any sense, man. These woods were here long before we got here. They didn't need.
Yeah.
I mean, and here's this guy clearly saying this is why they're managing it,
And if the audience gets a chance, go out and check out the Wentworth doc. Mark and I will go over it another time, just because we've spent so much time on this. But what's interesting is he talks about different types, how there's certain types that rely on their smell more than their vision. and that their smell is actually better than their vision. But he also talks about there's certain types, I think the ones in the Pacific Northwest mainly had scent glands on their forearms. And he saw the scent glands on their forearms. And the ones he had pulled from Texas, the scent gland was in the armpit. And he says it's extremely pungent smell, but their scent glands are in their armpits.
It's one of those things where you'd have to be there to know it.
Right.
The guy's like got all this inside knowledge, man, and it's been confirmed all throughout the years.
Yeah.
It's those old things. Oh, the skunk ape. The name is, man, it's the southern the armpit gland. I mean, there's so many things that are just, it makes so much sense. And
well, I sent a couple things over to a couple of people at universities to look at it and to give me their feedback on what he's saying. There's another doctor I want to send this over to, a primatologist I'm going to send it to, and just really investigate the crap out of this. But I think if the audience is listening, what would help us the most is if people would help us investigate this. Again, we're not saying it's true. There's no way to prove it 100% true. But I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of truth to this document. There's a lot of things in this document that are, I don't think he would be lucky enough to make up. And it reads to me like a guy that has examined bodies, dead and alive.
Yeah, and it confirms on way too many points based on eyewitness descriptions, based on behaviors that were witnessed, and especially in the end of the document about our lands being set aside specifically to handle and contain this species. Wildlife management practices. I mean, come on, man. And this is all, it's just mind-blowing,
It is. It is kind of mind-blowing. And it's interesting that, like I said, it's just been sitting out on the web. I know a lot of the guys that are researching it were like, the government. I think the government was going to squash this. They would have done it a long time ago. I really do.
Well, I mean, who knows? Maybe they were waiting for the right people to pick it up. You never know.
Great.
You never know, man. Hey, like I said, we could be on the precipice of this.
Yeah. Or
it could be, the other side of it is they're just not going to come out and confirm any of this. It'd be some shit, though, if we, got this investigation going and then soon afterwards all of it was confirmed by the announcement.
Yeah. It'd be nice. I like the idea. I'm not against what he's saying. There's no way you're going to keep them in these little natural refugee. It's just not going to work with these things. I mean, I could tell you that, and I don't have one in my garage. I'm studying, but I can tell you that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Just because of what we know of their behavior. But, it kind of shows you, too, some of the fighting that goes back and forth. We talk about the fighting in the Bigfoot world between one idiot and another idiot. But the same thing goes on in the scientific world. If you read the Wentworth document, and it's up on the website, but if you read the Wentworth document, she doesn't care for Dr. Miller. I say she, I keep saying she. The biologist doesn't care for Dr. Miller, thinks Dr. Miller's full of himself. And they're all kind of infighting to classify it. Like, she comes back, and we can go into this another time, Mark, but she comes back and says, hey, I don't want to go, we're not going to call them Cebidae telidaes, we're going to call them Primus, and then I like your term afterwards, what you call them. I just think it's funny that there's this, that's another thing that almost makes you think it has to be real. The thing has to be. I know, man. Here's two scientists arguing back and forth.
I know it. And I'll tell you something else. I looked up Primus, and it means the first.
It means what?
The first.
Oh, I gotcha.
So we're looking at, basically, she's trying to call it the first primate.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And that's how she wants to name it. But I wanted to do the video. I wanted the audience to take a look at the evidence and maybe help the group investigate. I know I want to mention again, Tracy, Joe, Chris, Mark, Pam, they've all spent months really investigating this document and I know they're looking for help. And so there's some people I'm gonna send this off to, and see if they can help us. Mark, if you want to start investigating it, this will be the first show. Not a great show, but I wanted to give the background of the document. I wanted to lay out the document for people who haven't read it, and let them know we're investigating this. And the more information we get, we'll present it to the audience. And
yeah, I mean, I this is a first glance for me, and I'm giving spontaneous. It's a spontaneous evaluation. Maybe I made some sensitive areas, maybe I didn't. The more I look into this, the more I'm gonna have a little bit better of a handle on what's going on in it. But I mean, the bottom line is like you said, why would somebody go to the extent of writing this when there's so much as a hoax? I mean, this is a well-researched individual that's stating these things. And I can tell you, Wes, from a researching standpoint, what this person has written, whoever it was, a lot of this stuff confirms. And I know you know that. I know you know that. A lot of this stuff confirms. So it is what it is, man. Like you said, we'll never be able to fully confirm it, but I don't think you could be a researcher or an eyewitness and not get something out of this that would tell you, hey, man, this guy's right.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what would be interesting, man, to go and interview somebody from U.S. Forestry and just drop a couple of terms from this paper and just film his face when you start dropping those bombs on his ass. Like, what are you guys going to validate C. Teleday, man? It's just what the guy does, you know what I mean? Like, how the hell do you know that kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That'd be
It's not a bad idea. There's a few forestry guys I'll probably send it to and have them take a look at it and see what they have to say. A lot of those guys, though, and that's why I hate... a lot of those guys will say... It's like I was saying earlier, why I don't even want to bring certain people up. Because I'll say, hey, I talked to so-and-so, they said this and this and this, but I can't really tell you who it was, and I can't really tell you how they got...
Yeah.
And that's what the frustrating part is.
Yeah, man.
Some of those guys might come back to me and say, hey, this is a real term, this is what we call it, or whatever, but don't use my name and don't really say where I'm from.
Yeah, and then here you go.
And so here you go. It feels half-assed to the audience that I'm saying.
Yeah. But
well,
meanwhile, you're like confirmed on every level, and the only one who knows it. It's one of those things.
Yeah, and I hate that.
I hate that as well. I've had that.
I don't even want to be a part of that. I'd rather just say, hey, Joe Blow from the Forestry Department in Washington State says.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can't do that.
Well, then you have Joe Blow losing some retirement ability.
Yeah.
So, but hey, man, I'm going to stick to it. We may be on the verge.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we really are, and I think that the document itself. There's a lot in here. There's a lot to digest in this document. What he's saying.
Oh my God!
I mean, a lot.
Yeah.
And then, if you get a chance, and we'll cover the Wentworth doc, and then maybe we'll have Joe on the air next show, and have Joe come on and give us updates, because I know he's actually tracking down the granddaughters of these two folks, and he's going to try and make contact with them. So when we do another show, we can bring him on, have him share the updates, and we can kind of go further into the investigation. I wanted this to just be more of a introduction. Here's the document. It could be true. It could not be true.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we could probably prove it's 99% true. But even then, it's not 100%. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly believe, man, that if you brought the man on, if he was still alive, people still wouldn't believe. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so, I mean, those of us who know can find some absolution in this. I'm doing it right now as we speak. I mean, it's like, wow. This is legitimate to me. I can say that. I mean, I can't prove it, but I'm telling you, this confirms on a bunch of shit. And that's incredible.
Yeah. And we can get into the foot later on the next show,
all right.
Where he talks about some having padding. And
yeah, we definitely skipped over a bunch of stuff,
Yeah. And I want to get into that. I guess we can briefly talk about it. he talks about some having this extra fat layer, this padding in their foot. And that was the reason why in Washington State and in Oregon and in some of these higher elevations, why they didn't get frostbite, why they didn't lose toes. He said they were just, the bottom of the foot had all this extra fat, all this extra padding. But he said that there were some down south that didn't have that extra padding. He wasn't seeing that, like, let's say, in Texas or in Georgia. The amount of padding he found from California to the ones he originally studied in Texas, there was a huge difference in the padding of the feet, which makes sense. You know, I've looked at the Elkins Creek cast when I had Deputy Atkins on the show, and if you look at his cast, it's much different than the Patty cast. You can tell there's not as much fat on that foot as on Patty's foot.
Yeah, and that, again, I mean, I hate to keep saying it, but that confirms on another level again. You know what I mean? Yeah. Our tracks that we see down here, typically, especially from juveniles, are there's no evidence of that real thick pad. I mean, a lot of that's in the swamp and so on, but, you know, the bottom line is...
You're ruining the shot, Melanie.
All right, listen, we're going to have to wrap it up now.
All right, man.
All right, yeah, listen, hey, we're going to finish this up and continue with it, right?
Yeah, we'll continue with the investigation, and we will, next time we'll cover the Wentworth dock and then the update, because there is a few updates from the investigation. So,
hey, listen, say goodbye to my members.
Goodbye, Crypto Reality. You guys have a great night. I will see you guys next time.
Hey, that's Wes Germer. Thanks for coming, Wes.
Thank you, brother.
We'll see you again soon, buddy.